Welcome to this episode of the Essential Church Podcast, an ongoing conversation about some of the most important issues facing the local church today. I'm your host, Andrew Arndt, and today I want to take you to a conversation I had recently with Laurel Schumacher and Gary Abbott, who work for a ministry called Vital Church, and it's an amazing ministry that comes alongside churches that are in crisis, does some real spiritual discernment with them, and also some practical discernment around the factors that contributed to the crisis, what's going on in their church that's currently unhealthy, and what they need to do to get out of it. And of course, we are living in the midst of massive church crisis. It feels like every day there's a new church in the headlines that has fallen into trouble. And this wound up being a really, really delightful conversation on the factors not only that contribute to unhealth, but of course the flip side is what is it that makes for a healthy church and how do churches climb up out of the crisis when they're in it. I think you're going to be really helped by it. They have an amazing ministry that is not just about crisis, but it's also about when you're in transition of any kind, we can be friends to you and help you through it. So I think you're going to be really blessed by it. Without further commentary from me, here's to the conversation. Well, I'm really excited to have on our podcast today a couple new friends of mine, Laurel Schumacher and Gary Abbott. And I'll just say a little bit about these guys. They are part of a ministry that I think you all will be very interested to know about, and they're doing some really, really amazing work helping churches. So the ministry is called Vital Church, and I met Laurel last year at our September Essential Church Learning Community. She happened to be there with another person, and we spent some time talking about Vital Church and what it does, and I was really fascinated to hear about this ministry. And then her and Gary and I hopped on a longer call later in the fall, and I got to tell you guys, I was blown away by the level of intentionality and care, thoughtfulness, but also like the spiritual seriousness with which you approach the task of helping churches that are in trouble get out of crisis. And so I've kind of previewed just a little bit there what you guys are all about. But first of all, welcome to the podcast, Laurel and Gary. Good to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Honor to be with you.
Yeah, and Laurel, I was saying off camera before, I see you're in your fleece today. I'm in my fleece as well. It's whiteout conditions here in Colorado. You're located up in New York, and so it must be balmy up there.
So balmy, nice and in the 20s. Perfect.
It's so great. And Gary, you're in Indiana, and
yeah, same temperature here too. So yeah, we're all kind of feeling it.
It's so great. You know, this morning, guys, I was listening to easy Christmas jazz on the way into work with the whiteout conditions because I've made a decision. And the decision is that as long as winter lasts, Christmas lasts too. And this is a mental health decision.
Oh my.
And
okay.
Yeah. And so what I'm planning on doing is convening an ecumenical council soon, actually, to see if we could get that put in
Laurel
writing, because I just think it'll
part.
help a lot of people. That's what I think. Talking about Bible churches.
This is going to help people. Do you also have your Christmas lights still up? I need to know. And your tree?
My wife took our Christmas lights down 2 days ago. We made sure to keep them up for all the 12 days of Christmas. Yep. Also a mental health decision. And then I do have a little Christmas tree on the side table in my office. And I had the lights on that going with my easy Christmas jazz this morning. So, but anyway, glad to have you guys on the podcast. I would love it. I think a good place to start would be with you guys just talking about the ministry of Vital Church, what it is you guys do, how you come alongside churches, and then we'll chase down a couple rabbit trails there on what it takes for churches to get out of crisis when they fall into it, and also maybe how churches can kind of, it's not possible, I don't think, to fully crisis-proof a community because some things just kind of happen. But I think there are things that we can do to make our communities more resilient and more immune to the sorts of things that take down churches. So tell us about Vital Church. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so Vital Church has been around for around 30 years, and we've been helping churches really across the country do exactly what you said, help them through times of transition, times of crisis. And so we exist to help churches cultivate clarity, purpose, and hope in seasons where that might be in short supply. And our goal is to help churches thrive, seeing transition and honestly even crisis as opportunities for us to turn to the Lord, seek His will, and pursue His will for our church and for the community. And so we help churches really in three areas of support. First and foremost, and we do this first because it is of first importance, is as an area of discernment. That's where we start. And we ask a simple question: what is God saying to this church through the Spirit? No matter what situation led you to call us, it probably wasn't great. I don't get too many phone calls from churches that are like, "Hey, we're just calling to tell you things are awesome. Okay, bye." Right? I mean, it's usually some real challenge going on. And so we say, okay, let's just pray first. Let's just stop and get the whole community together. Let's just pray and let's ask a lot of questions and let's listen to each other and let's do that first. From there, discerning what God is calling the church to, we then help guide through the transition season, oftentimes through an intentional interim pastor, helping them take the steps that they believe God's calling them to. And then the third area of support is we equip the church to lead into the new season. So what we say is we're going to help lock arms with you to move toward God's preferred future for your church. And it looks different in every church. And the struggle, the pain, the grief, the confusion, the hurt, the anger, it's different in every single church. And so we take that time up front really to just stop and listen before we act. And so you don't call us up and get like, hey, here's your 5 ways to become an awesome church again. We just don't function that way. We just listen a lot, and then we walk alongside people. So we're pastors, not consultants. That's like a big deal to us, that we only hire pastors. So we're pastors to churches that need it. Laurel, please add anything to that.
I was going to say, one of the key question that we enter every single dialogue with the church is, what is the Spirit saying to the church in this season? We take that right from Revelation. And so we're praying that as a team. We ask the church to pray that, the congregation, the leaders, everybody, just be praying. What is the Spirit saying to us right now in this season? And then we follow that through. And so that impacts all of the different phases that Gary was talking about. And it's basically a thread that runs through everything and keeps us connected and going in the direction that God is calling the church.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you said, we're going to circle back to like, what is the Spirit saying to the church? Because it really is your approach that's so fascinating to me. There's this very Spirit-led, Spirit-driven approach, but it's also, you guys are not shying away from the brutal facts, you know? So it's like this combination of like the facts of the moment and then that more mystical side of it that I think is part of the secret and the sauce. So I do want to come back to that, but go back to the history for a second. You guys are 30 years old, and Gary, you were saying that you don't see yourselves as consultants, but as a group of pastors. As I understand the history of Vital Church, it actually started out as a group of pastors getting together, trying to figure out how to help other pastors or other churches. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely true. Founded by an individual, but then kind of very quickly became 4 pastors and their families, really taking this idea that God is a God who, when he sees pain and hurt and confusion, doesn't stand at a distance. He actually steps toward that. And our greatest example of that, obviously, is Christ himself. And so if we are his followers, or as Paul says, we're to be imitators of God, and we know that Jesus said he's going to build his church from now until the time he returns to restore all things. So we know he cares about it. Let's make our lives about stepping into places of hurt for the bride of Christ to be beautiful. And so that's really where it started with these kind of 4 pastors going around and stepping into that space. Yeah, they've made their lives and their careers out of it. And we're so blessed and humbled that all 4 of those individuals are really still part of the organization.
They are. 30 years later, all 4 of those pastors are still part of the organization.
Yeah, and they're still leading, and they've done a really incredible thing. Not to jump a little bit here, but 1 in 4 pastors, it said, plan to retire before 2030. So transition is about to become normative for the American church, and many of those churches haven't put in proper succession or done leadership development in a way that it's like, okay, this thing is going to survive past the vision and energy of maybe even the founding pastor.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's so humbling that I get to be a part of Vital Church is these leaders at Vital Church have thought that way.
Wow.
How do we, as an organization, move into the future? So they're living what we're telling churches, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Why is it important? Just tell me, help maybe our listeners and help me with this distinction. There are a lot of great organizations out there that are doing really good consulting work. Why is it important to say that you guys are a group of pastors helping churches and not consultants helping churches?
Yeah, I love this actually. I think this is so key to what we do. We don't come and say, here's what you could be doing or should be doing.
Right.
We come and again take that approach of let's pray together. Let's seek the Lord together. Let's, like Gary says, link arms together and do this as a group moving forward. And so we really come alongside and equip leaders and walk with churches through really tough seasons. And I think that's what sets us apart.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Great answer, Laurel. I think what I would maybe add to that is our ultimate aim as followers of Jesus is to look more and love more like Jesus. Like that's it. That's the call. That's what we're moving toward. That's the trajectory of redemption and sanctification. And so that's why we think pastors doing this work matters.
Yeah,
because we're not trying to turn you into, hey, here's what we've said a good church looks like.
Right.
We're trying to help you discover what it means to look more and love more like Jesus in a season through pain.
And to become the church that God has called you to be.
Yes.
Like we're not like applying a template to you, and we're not calling you into a model and trying to shoehorn you into that model. We're trying to help call the best things out of you and help you realize your potential as a church, which to me, that is just so amazing. So I was thinking as I was preparing for the interview, I was just thinking about, again, what I was so struck by in your ministry, this blend of this spirit-driven approach, but then also you guys are very rigorous in trying to drill down into like, okay, so what happened here? And what prepared the groundwork for this crisis, and then where are we now on the other side of the crisis? And so it would be easy to fall into, actually it struck me that the church has constantly battled these sort of heresies. Do you know what I mean? Like you could actually map them into some ancient heresies. One being the heresy of Gnosticism, which is just like everything is spiritual and the material stuff doesn't matter. And then another heresy being basically the heresy of like, well, only the material matters and there is no transcendent, Yeah. And true Christianity is like this perfect blend of like, no, there is the divine side and the human side. There's the mystical and the material, and those come together so well. So it's maybe not surprising to me that you guys are doing well with this because it maps into the way that God has actually set things up to work. So that I'm leading to a question with that. What does that look like for you guys? So you get on the phone with the church when the church is in a crisis and you do some prayer work together and you start discerning and stuff, but then you really do spend some time drilling into the details of what's happening in the church. Can you just kind of walk us through some of that process? And then also, what are some of the big categories of things that you're looking at in the church as far as indicators of church health or unhealth?
Yeah. So here's where we start. Like you said, we pick up the phone, and what we're really, honestly, at least this is for me. When I talk to a church, I'm trying to infuse a little bit of hope beyond the current reality, and point them toward Christ and His redemptive power. And there's something about a church that's struggling, that maybe can't see past the pain that's in front of them, talking to someone who is a part of an organization that for 30 years has seen God redeem again and again and again, and see that He's bigger than the moment. So that's kind of where we start. But then once we actually engage with the church, we engage with the church. And I think that's really, really important.
Not just the leader, not just the leadership, but the body.
The whole church.
That's right. And we tell whoever is on the phone with us, we say from the beginning, the whole church has to be a part of this.
Wow.
You want the whole church to be part of this. So it's spirit led, but data driven. This gets a little bit back to what you were saying before, the material and the transcendent. So we do a survey where it's online survey, 70 or so questions that are standardized across our database, so we can compare it across our 30 years of experience to tease out things like where are we seeing conflict? How are we feeling about leaders? Do you understand the vision? Do you feel like you're headed in a good direction. Where are the pain points? We kind of do all that work. And that, along with our team getting together and praying for the church, we develop a report that is data-driven because it's from the survey, but it's spirit-led.
Yeah.
And from there, we say, hey, here's the mirror. Here's what you said about your church. Mm-hmm. Every one of those involved. And honestly, those surveys, and we do some listening sessions as well, that gives space for people to start healing because they're heard. Right? If you're hurting and you're doing it in silence, that's a really painful thing. But if you're hurting and someone reaches out and says, hey, I'd love to hear from you. Your voice matters. That begins the healing process.
Wow.
So we hold up that mirror and we say, hey, here are the pain points.
Yeah.
Or the points of interest or things that maybe this needs some attention in the congregation. And then that leads to us providing a set of recommendations, which we call the maps. So it's a mirror and a map. We say, hey, here's how you could navigate this season. Go pray about it. If you disagree, tell us to take a hike.
Right.
But if you say, yeah, I actually believe this, maybe God's in this and he's calling us to these things, then let us walk beside you through taking some of these steps. So it's this, like, let's move forward through this together, not bury it underneath, not say, oh, your grief doesn't matter. No, it really matters. Let's actually sit in it for a while. Listen to each other.
That data piece is super important because I want to just make it clear when we are talking to churches, we're looking for participation rates of the entire congregation in the 50s or 60s range. We will tell churches if it's too low, and we'll say this is not going to be an accurate representation of your community, and we'll encourage them to keep going for more and more. And so most of the time when we have our surveys closed, we're at like between 60 and I think we even had a church like in the 90s before that kind of participation. So what we're saying
huge.
Is
I just want to stop on that. I mean, that's so huge. And part of the beauty is if the church was bought in, they had a chance to, well, they say you can't have buy-in until you have weigh-in.
Yep.
So if the church is kind of weighed in on the process and invested in the process, they are much more bought in than on the outcome. And it's just their involvement in the process that actually might set a lot of the groundwork for the success of the transition.
It does. Yeah, it really does.
But keep going.
Well, just that data piece that we really make sure that we're hearing from as many people as possible in the online survey. And then we do one-on-one conversations with people as well. And sometimes we'll even get other people who didn't take the survey. So then you increase the participation rate in that direction too. It's a beautiful process, and it really does act like a mirror. And we can say, if we have that large level of participation, this is a true mirror. It makes it much easier for people to grab onto it and recognize that data and accept it as truth.
I think what's fascinating about this to me, guys, and I want you to speak a little bit more to this, is that when we think about a church in crisis, generally we think about senior pastor moral failure. And I know the churches that you're working with, primarily as I understand it, that is what happened. So it's either there's moral failure, there was embezzlement of funds, there was something with the central leader has happened. But the process of healing is not really a process of pointing at the bad guy, although there's grief work that has to happen around that. But it's not a process of pointing at the bad guy and going, wow, that one singular really terrible thing happened, and that's why we're in this place. But as I understand it, as you guys are talking with congregations, what is being unearthed is a whole dynamic or a whole set of dynamics of unhealth that were either made possible by that senior pastor or made the moral failure of that senior pastor possible. Is that an accurate way maybe to think about what you guys are discovering as you're moving forward with churches?
Yes, absolutely. We are always looking for the root beneath the presenting issue when we go into churches. You see the symptoms, you see the aftermath of different decisions and things like that, and we're looking to see what's in place that allowed that to happen. Because for us, we don't want to go in and just fix the symptoms, the things we can see. We're going in, we want these churches that we're serving to have lasting change, lasting gospel impact in their communities. And the only way to do that is really get down deep and address those core issues.
Right.
And that's what our diagnostic process pulls out, is those core issues. So you've got the presenting issue of somebody's bad decision, but why was that able to happen? What has been in place? What's been in the DNA of the church that has allowed that to happen? And so once we get that, we can focus in there and really help the church as a whole confess that inadequacy or that failing and move forward in a much more healthy direction.
Let's go a little further with that. Gary, I'll just put this in front of you, and you guys both speak to this, but it's not, I know that you say like every church is unique, certainly. But like every human person is unique, but also with every human person, when they fall into unhealth, there are usually pretty predictable patterns of unhealth that makes a person's life unhealthy. So as you guys are talking with these churches, if you could distill it down into a handful of things that are like common factors that have set the stage for a crisis, what are those common factors? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so just to kind of dovetail off of what Laurel said, kind of looking at those core issues, like we're looking at that foundation, and at the foundation of every church, you have family systems, right? I mean, the Bible itself says we're a family, right? We're the body of Christ, but we're the family as well. That's another analogy that's used, and so of course we're going to function like one. And so whatever family system there is, if there's something skew in that, it's going to be repeated across the entire system. And so in many ways, that's what we're looking for, is what's the family system, and where might there be places that are creating environments for things to happen that are less than what Christ may call us to as his representatives. And so we do find three kind of biggies.
Yeah, talk about those.
So to speak. Yeah, so the three big ones that we see most often, first and foremost, and this is not a popular word, so and it may even be abrasive to those that hear it, but idolatry of some sort. And I know it's not a you don't want to. Not a bunch of people are going to show up and say like, "Oh, tell me more about this idolatry thing." But I mean,
we're firmly in the realm of the first couple commandments here, so I think you're on real.
Yes.
You're on.
I think where
do we go wrong?
Right.
Well, we stopped worshiping the one true God, so I think you got to continue with this one.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, what's interesting is like, why did God give those 10 commandments? Because those are the things that we as humans struggle with. Right. He didn't tell us like, don't do this thing that's super easy. He said, do these things that are very natural and hard to get right. And so, we see that in some ways where it can play out in 1,000 different ways, and in subtle ways where you wouldn't even call it idolatry. You'd say like, well, no, that's just a preference, right? So it could be anything from a person, that could be the pastor, is, I idolize that individual above all else. It could be a way a service is operated, a type of music. It could be a program. It could be a ministry.
A building.
It could be a building. It could be the type of people that sit next to me. And those that shouldn't. I mean, all of these things can be idolized. Success can be idolized. I think we've had some conversations about that, and I have some experience in churches with that. And so that's kind of at the baseline. We see that pretty often, but we also see, and sometimes an outflow of that, conflict and power issues. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? We're just following right along the 10 Commandments, but where people have either misused power in the overuse sense, they've exerted too much authority or too much power over a group of people, or at times not enough, where someone has had a responsibility but not exercised authority. So those power issues can come in to play, and then anytime there's grief or disruption, conflict is almost it's right around the corner. Because people are going to have different opinions about what caused it and what should happen now. And so, not surprisingly, what does Jesus pray for us? Very last thing, he prays for unity. Why? Because it's hard, and we need the Spirit to help us actually accomplish it.
Wow.
And so those are the three things we see: idolatry, power, control.
That is amazing to me, man. I mean, that is, what does Jesus say? The two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. It is about how are we related to God, and how are we related to one another, and are we keeping those relationships well maintained and clean so far as it depends on us. And what is a church? The family systems angle is huge, because what is a church but a large family system? And once those dynamics go unchecked, I mean, they can really compound, and all of a sudden you just have, it's amazing how you can have a really unhealthy system and it looks amazing on the outside.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
just
that's
is like it's a powder keg. It's ready to explode. And we know that story well. We're celebrating the week that we're recording this. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary as a church. And, 18 years ago on the outside, we looked like one of the most successful churches in the nation, but we had a whole bunch of stuff internally that was not right. And, and the Lord
one
had
of
to
the
walk
places
us
that we
through a really
connected-
painful process that helped us turn the corner into the health that we're living into today. But what had been corrected was idolatries got corrected. We got our heart right again, and then how we relate to one another. And so issues of power and conflict, those things got corrected for sure. Yeah.
Wow.
What were you going to say,
So
Gary?
that resonates with your experience.
What's that?
So that resonates with your experience.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I love thinking about it in the family systems angle is so interesting because I think about my own family. What has made for health in my family? We have 4 kids that are teenagers. And as far as we can tell, they're doing well. But what we work on a daily basis is making sure that our loyalties are right. That we are first surrendered to the Lord, and then that we are clean with one another. And if we have those things, then we have the issues that make for health. And that sets us up to be the kind of family that we're supposed to be. So tell me this, guys. I have 2 more questions about churches that are kind of making the turn into health out of crisis. And then I have one question that I want to ask just about kind of crisis-proofing your church, as it were. But, you guys go into these churches, you do the prayer and discernment, you do all the diagnostic work, you're having the focus groups where you're talking with people about their experience, you're making sure that you have good participation in that. I'm sure you guys are not batting 1,000 on that. Some churches don't make the turn. So the churches, or maybe you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but the churches that do make the turn successfully, what are they doing that helps them make that turn successfully? And the churches that don't, what did they fail to do?
That's really
Yeah,
good.
Laura, you want to jump in or you want me to?
Yeah, can I just say our stat? Because we actually have
I
a
would love to
pretty
hear it, actually, yeah.
good record. Yeah, so 96% of the churches we've
Whoa.
served in the last 6 years, still have a gospel presence in their communities right now.
You guys, that's amazing.
It's yes, we're like, that's all God, right?
Yeah.
Like, we come in and we do this messed up thing. We make a mistake every time. We have to apologize every time. Like, we're humans coming into a broken system, right?
Yep.
We come in with our own issues. And through that, God uses it to make these beautiful outcomes in churches.
Wow.
I know. So it's a very, very cool number.
96% is an amazing number.
96%.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really, really humbling. And Laurel, I actually think the answer to the question was kind of in there, right? Like, what's the secret ingredient to success? And in many of these cases, it's humility.
Wow.
It's standing up and saying, I was wrong. And you create a culture of being able to be honest about imperfection, and you give that to the Lord, and you ask forgiveness when you've done something wrong. I mean, our most powerful instances of restoration are moments when eldership or leadership walks up in front of a congregation and says, we didn't do what was right, and we are sorry. Will you forgive us?
And that's
Do you want to? Can I just say this real quick? You talked about the idolatries that drive us along, and one of the idolatries that will lead us to calamity is the idolatry of we have to always present ourselves as powerful.
Yeah.
We have to always present ourselves as perfect, and we have to always present ourselves as righteous. Yeah. And we forget that we're just a group of sinners bumbling along in the mercy of God, and the lies that start accumulating in our midst, and the inauthenticity that starts accumulating. I mean, that sets the groundwork for disaster for sure. And I asked this guy yesterday over coffee. He goes to our church. And I asked him, I said, what do you want out of church? And he said, I want church to be a place where our weaknesses are welcomed.
Yes.
And that's a humility statement. I don't need my church to be this celebration of machismo or power. I need my church to be a place where we can be a group of broken people under the grace of God who are being healed and sanctified, but we are in process. And the acknowledgement of that is by itself healthy. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
I mean, look, one of our targeted outcomes, we have 5 targeted outcomes. First and foremost, it's right up there at the top, is that gospel values are embedded in a congregation. That's where we're seeing the most success. So it's like, well, what is gospel values? What does that even mean? Well, where my mind goes every time when I hear gospel values embedded is to Paul talking about who Jesus is in that Philippians 2. He humbled himself. Though he's in the very nature of God, he humbled himself, made himself nothing. What is a disciple other than someone that follows that pattern of Jesus?
Wow.
And so that to me is, so when there is pain, when there is brokenness, when there is disruption, do we say, I'll own part of that. I'll own my part of that.
Wow.
And if we are, then community can be restored.
Wow.
Yeah. And church leaders, when they even make that first phone call or email to us, that in itself is an act of humility.
Mm-hmm.
That right there, we have a problem. Something is not right. And one of the things we see way too often is churches will wait 6 months to a year longer than really they should to contact us, to get help, to say there's a problem.
Wow.
It takes a while sometimes to get to that point. Yes. But once they do, right? Like that's where one of our pastors always says, with great humility, there's great grace, right?
Right.
That once you do that, then God comes in and he can do the work.
Wow.
And he does.
You're making me remember one of my favorite sort of old teachers of the early church. This guy, St. Isaac, said that he's reflecting on Philippians 2, and he says that humility is the raiment, it's the clothing of the Godhead. Humility, which we don't think of when we think of God.
No.
We think of God as powerful and beating his chest and all of that, and God is powerful, but it's not a chest-beating power. Right. It's the power of love. It's the power of smallness. It's the power of humility. We're just coming out of the Christmas season. God reveals himself in the manger, and we're headed to Good Friday. He reveals himself in the powerlessness and the humility of the cross. That's this story. And then St. Isaac goes on to say that whoever wishes to become like God clothes themselves also in humility. That's what we're supposed to do. And unfortunately, for a lot of churches, it takes a crisis. For a lot of individuals, it takes a crisis to get us humble again, which is, I think that's why Paul says, when I'm weak, that's when I'm actually strong. It's like when we come in touch with our weakness and our brokenness again, that's now all of a sudden we're coming in touch with the power of God. So I suppose, the last question I want to ask, and I feel like we've kind of answered it just based on what we've said, but churches that want to do all that they can to crisis-proof themselves, and you can't do that completely, but you can set the body up to be healthier. You know what I mean? And to be more resilient to the bad things that happen to you. What are the postures of heart that the church needs to take to stay in a place of health?
Yeah, I think it centers on that humility again, but there are some practical outflows.
Yeah, say that.
Humility.
Mm-hmm.
So
say what those are.
Two that come to mind for me. A practical outflow of humility for church leadership is that they submit themselves to authority of others as well. A leader who fails to submit him or herself to the authority of others or the wisdom of others, I think probably sets themselves up for failure.
Pastor Brady says around here all the time, who in your world can say no to you? Yep. And unfortunately for a lot of senior pastors, even their elder board can't actually say no to them. It's actually set up to be a group of yes men and yes women. Mm-hmm. So do you have people that can actually tell you, no, you're not allowed to do that?
Yeah, or that it's not wise for you, or that's not healthy wise, for you. Good for the people that God has given you to love. Mm-hmm. I mean, any of those types of no's are good. And then the other one, I would say, this one's a little more nuanced, but it comes from personal experience. As a church leadership, or maybe as a whole congregation, but certainly as a church leadership, testing yourself or your group in asking, am I more interested in following Jesus and being a display of his life in my life? Or am I more interested in creating opportunities for other people to follow Jesus? Where am I spending more energy? Am I spending more energy creating systems and structures and ways for other people to follow Jesus? Or am I creating systems and structures and abilities for me to be transformed into his image?
It's like, what's the priority? What's the stress that you lay on your own personal development and growth into Christ-likeness?
Yeah. And then I think the church system itself, again, this is family system, puts pressure on that as well, because we've oftentimes prioritized charisma over character. Even though the scriptures never do that. Right. You never see it once. You see the opposite, right? Go back to the first king if you want and just walk yourself through it. But
if the family systems, again, if the family system side of it is true, then our own development automatically impacts the development of other people outside of any ministry that we happen to build. It's felt throughout the system. It's like if your mom, if you're in a family of 6, if mom and dad are healthy, they don't need to talk a big game about what the mission and the vision of the family is and what the discipleship program of the family is. It's just sort of like, I don't know, follow me as I follow Jesus. And I think Jesus models that. And he says in John 17, you invoked this earlier, Gary, but he says, for them, I sanctify myself, that they may be truly sanctified. And Paul says to Timothy, watch your life and your doctrine closely. Persevere in them. If you do that, you're going to save both yourself and your hearers. So the stress that we lay on our own development, our own sanctification, that automatically redounds to the benefit of other people, regardless of any ministry that we happen to build around that or any programs that we happen to build, which is in the American church, we've just so lost sight of that. We see ministers as functionaries and as program leaders and not as sinners striving to become saints by the grace of God, leading a group of people like that. Like it's just our mentality is wrong.
Yeah. Dovetailing off that, I mean, goodness, think about, when you think of pastor or leader, what do you think of? Do you think of a member of a congregant who has a specific role? Because that's how Paul describes it. We're members of a body, each having our own responsibility. When you think of it that way, it rightly levels the playing field, I believe, in terms of what a leader is. Not lowering the bar of expectation. I don't mean it that way. But what I mean is you're seen as part of the body of Christ. Serving a role just like others do as well.
I would can I interject with one other thing just about what you were saying? Like some of those, more, I don't know, common sense is not the word I'm looking for, but more concrete examples of things you can do, right? I would say one of them that might sound a little bit boring is good governance. We see a lot of challenges arise in churches, again, like Gary was saying, because leaders have not asserted their power, or they've overasserted it, or they've abused it. And so, and that's not just pastoral leaders, right? That's elder leaders, staff leaders, everybody in the church has a certain level of leadership and responsibility for the whole of the body, right? It is a family. And so every person in the church is sometimes not able or willing to fulfill that, right? In the way that needs to be done. And so that's just really big. If you have the good governance in place, then the pastor knows how to proceed, the leaders know how to proceed, the church knows how to proceed, and there's just a little bit more structure in the foundation. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you guys have given us a ton to think about. I love this conversation. And just personally, I want to thank you for the really good work that you're doing. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, thanks. We're at vitalchurchministry.org. That's ministry.
Okay.
Y, not IES.
Okay.
vitalchurchministry.org.
And can churches only call you if they're in crisis, or do you guys do kind of some prevention care as well? What are the kinds of churches that should be reaching out to you?
Yeah.
Any church that is feeling as though something is changing and they need help.
That's great.
That's the broadest I can think of. So what we've said is we help churches in transition, and every church is in transition. And so on some level, there's some change that's occurring. And if you feel any sense of gosh, we could use some help, some outside help, some trustworthy help in walking through this, we believe that we can provide resource. Not every church needs an interim pastor.
Right.
But we truly believe every church needs to take time to ask themselves, what is God calling us to? What is God saying to us through the Spirit? And then what are some key things that we could focus on to look more and love more like Him? And
we'll make sure that y'all's website is in the show notes. Guys, pastors helping pastors. That's kind of where it's at. So thank you for the good ministry. Thanks for the good work. And thanks for being on the Essential Church podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege and an honor. Thank you.